Greetings once more, dear friends. Fanatical Dragon back once again, and today to talk about a streaming movie, which is something I almost never do here. But Timo Tjahjanto's newest movie, The Shadow Strays, just dropped on Netflix 2 days ago on October the 17th. I'm recording this on Saturday, October the 19th, so this is going to be a completely spoiler-free review as best as I can keep it, but I've got a lot to talk about with the movie. Absolutely adored it. If you're not familiar with Timo Tjahjanto's work, I first discovered him with Headshot back in 2016, and then really was completely blown away when he followed up with The Night Comes for Us in 2018. Since then, he did The Big Four for Netflix in 2022, and now The Shadow Strays in 2024. An incredible movie. I think I wasn't expecting this to jump to the very top of my best movie of 2024 for me, but it absolutely has. I think it's his finest movie to date. If you're just jumping into his work for the first time, you can go right the way back to Headshot. They're all up on Netflix. I don't normally have a Netflix account. I'm all about physical media normally, but specifically got a Netflix account so that I could check out The Shadow Strays on day one, and absolutely blown away by the movie. Netflix's own synopsis for it tells us, skilled in the art of killing, a young assassin defies her mentor to save a boy from a ruthless crime syndicate, and she'll destroy anyone in her path. And won't she just? God damn. I think one of the things that Timo had spoken about was when he did The Night Comes for Us, which was kind of one of his, I think maybe his second collaboration with fight choreographer Mohammed Irfan, who's kind of since set up V-Action Design. He was working predominantly with martial artists, so kind of already a very, very accomplished and very established martial artist. In the case of Headshot with Iko Uwais, and then again in The Night Comes for Us with Iko Uwais, but also being joined by Joe Taslim, both of whom have a very strong martial arts background. So this time around, he kind of wanted to see if he could take actors who weren't familiar at all with action cinema and essentially kind of make a kick-ass action movie with those actors, and goddamn has he knocked that out of the park. So our film really revolves around the character 13, who's played by a relative newcomer, Aurora Ribeiro, who I think was 18 when they started making the film, which is astonishing. 4 months of solid training before they kind of started actually filming the movie, which pays off in incredible spades once we kind of get to the action sequences, of which there are many, but visually each one very, very different. And the film, most of the clips that you'll see in the teaser and in the main trailer kind of come from the first 18-minute section of the movie, which takes place in Japan and is phenomenal. That's kind of when we see the Strays, who are sort of a kind of a secretive kind of underbelly group of assassins that we kind of learn a little bit more about through the course of the film, but I don't want to say too much on that side of things. You can discover what the film chooses to tell us about that organisation when you check out the film yourself, but we certainly see them in their full kind of gear in that kind of first section, in the Japanese section, against this amazing backdrop, heavily inspired, I suspect, pretty obviously by the work of Utagawa Kineyoshi, who's kind of one of my favourite sort of Japanese artists from that period, and he made a piece called Takayashi the Witch and the Skeleton Spectre, which we see a sort of version of as the backdrop of the main kind of opening action sequence of the film, but then halfway through the fight it's backlit, which kind of gives it a completely different vibe, and it also has a second skeleton in it. So I suspect, I'd love to ask Timo directly, but I suspect that's because we are seeing two shadows kind of involved in that kind of first opening sequence. We're seeing 13, as I said, played by the spectacular Aurora Ribeiro, and we are seeing her mentor, Umbra, who's been played by Hannah Malassan, and the relationship between the two of them, pretty integral to the film. Really, both actresses absolutely mind-blowing. I hadn't seen either actress before in anything, really. I think Hannah Malassan done quite a lot more in Indonesian cinema. Aurora Ribeiro had also done a few movies, but I think certainly in both cases, this is the first time that either of these actresses had done an action picture, and they're both incredible, absolutely incredible. Kind of the action sequences, particularly that Aurora Ribeiro kind of has to face as the film goes on, all visually very different, and I think Timo's kind of gone to great steps to make sure that each one's lit differently, shot slightly differently, so that the camera work is almost a character in its own right in the film, and we kind of see it evolve and move and shake sometimes, other times very rock steady, and it kind of sometimes moves like a character. Sometimes we go into kind of first person's perspective as if you're kind of playing a video game, but literally just fleetingly for a few seconds, but works incredibly well when we kind of see through the eyes of the shadows and kind of see the sort of thermal lenses that they have on their armor suits. Works incredibly well, and really it's because of the consequences of what happens in that kind of first initial 18-minute action sequence that Aurora Ribeiro is benched, by the strays temporarily, so she's kind of sent back home to await further instructions. And during that time, she encounters the boy, as we hear in the synopsis. The boy is Minji, being played by Ali Fikri. Not too sure how young or old that kid is. I think he's pretty on the young side, but amazing performance from him too. And the bond that kind of that happens between those two happens pretty quickly, but quite naturally. And I was all in for it. I found that kind of beat really easy to follow, and really because of this connection that she's had with Munji, she ends up kind of really coming up against this crime syndicate, of which there are sort of principally really kind of four main kind of villain characters who drift in and out. The ones that stood out the most for me was really Agra Pilang, who's playing Haga, Andri Mushadi, who's playing Ariel, and then I think probably tipping both of those two gentlemen is Taskia Namya, who plays Soria. Her character's utterly demented, and she was really one of the best sort of female villains I've seen in any movie for quite a long time. I think all in all, for fans of action cinema, for fans of Indonesian action cinema specifically, and even if you've only seen The Raid and The Raid 2 and you aren't familiar with Timo's work, then dive into see what has basically been happening since The Raid 2, because I think Indonesian action cinema has evolved and changed and grown and become kind of more complex and more sophisticated visually. Their fight choreographies become more unique in a way that isn't really being replicated by too many other countries at the moment, particularly in Timo's work. And I kind of really noticed this first mostly in The Night Comes For Us. There's elements of it in Headshot, but really it leans in hard into it in The Night Comes For Us, where it is sometimes referred to as being quite gory. I think it may be kind of visceral and very consequence driven, so you kind of see the effects of somebody being cut with a sword or stabbed with a knife or shot with a gun in very, very kind of visceral, very kind of real practical effects terms. So there's a large amount of blood in the movie, but I don't think it's a gore fest. If you're familiar with the South Korean movie Project Wolf Hunting, or the recent Indian movie Kill, I think both of those movies probably gallon for gallon maybe had some kind of more blood going on in there than we're seeing in The Shadow Strays. And I never felt like the film was stepping into the realms of just being like torture porn, or kind of going down the Saw route where you're just watching people suffer for the sake of watching people suffer. It was always story driven. It was kind of always kind of very realistic, and it's sort of quite grounded in the consequences of the actions that the various characters are going through, but just beautifully acted, spectacularly shot, amazingly directed. I think it is undoubtedly, for me, absolutely taken top place as kind of the best movie that I have seen this year. But if you've not had a chance to check out the movie, I'm not going to spoil any more of the story for you. I would just say that I absolutely adored it. I think it's a masterpiece, and I don't use that word lightly. In fact, I'm not too sure if I've ever really called anything a masterpiece in the reviews that I've done. Twilight of the Warriors Walled In came damn close for me. I think that was previously would have been my vote for best film of the year. Baby Assassins 3 is also way up there, but I think as it stands just now for me this year, an incredible year for action cinema. I think Shadow Strays is right at the top spot. Then I'd probably say Twilight of the Warriors Walled In takes number 2, and I think Baby Assassins Part 3 takes the third spot. But I do think that Baby Assassins 3 is my favourite of the Baby Assassins movies, and I loved the first two. So I think in an incredible year of action, it was going to take an awful lot for me for this to really kind of make its mark, and it absolutely did so. I think Timo Tjahjanto is a director to watch. He's not an overnight sensation. He's been directing movies since the early 2000s, initially kind of horror features, when he was still kind of part of a kind of directing duo, but he's kind of since kind of found his own voice, and from Headshot onwards he's been sort of solo directing. I want to go back and rewatch The Big Four, because that's the one of his movies that I skipped by not having a Netflix account, so I'm now going to go and check that out. And I know it shares a couple of same cast members. I think there is Christo Emmanuel. He plays a character called Jackie, who ends up sort of indirectly crossing paths with 13, and I don't want to say any more than that, but certainly I believe Christo Emmanuel is also from The Big Four, and looking forward to kind of seeing him in a very different performance in that movie. But yeah, please check it out if you haven't already. If you do have Netflix, what are you waiting for? You should have already been all over this. If you have already seen it, let me know in the comments underneath what you thought of it, but please don't put any spoilers. I will do a proper sit down chat in due course when I really dive deep into the movie, kind of spoiler heavy, but I want to give everyone a chance to actually check out the movie before I do that. But for what was going to be a short 2-minute review in my mind, I think we're already up about 10 minutes, so I'm going to call it a day for just now. Plead with you to go and please watch The Shadow Strays. I hope you enjoy it. If you even enjoy it half as much as I did, it'll be a big win, but I certainly hope that you love it as much as I it was an incredible, incredible experience, and one that I'm going to check out, I think, multiple times over the next coming weeks, because there's so much to see. It's a very rich, densely kind of built, constructed world. The plot may be quite simplistic, but the techniques and the filmmaking that is underlying it all is anything but simplistic. There's a lot going on there and an awful lot to unpack. So keep your eyes peeled. If you don't already subscribe to the channel, now is a great time to do so, and join me later on this month or into early November, and I will sit down and have a proper full deep dive into the movie when I can kind of hopefully explain a little bit more without risk of spoiling anything for anyone. But yeah, go and check out the movie. It's absolutely fucking incredible. I've been the Fanatical Dragon. That's been Yokai, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care.